Evelyn Shaw believed she had mastered the delicate balance between power and intimacy. As CEO of Luminary Ventures, a thriving investment firm, she was lauded as a woman of sharp intellect, unshakable poise, and unrivaled instincts. Her life was a carefully curated tapestry of success: a Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, a husband who championed her ambitions, and a daughter excelling at Columbia. But beneath the polished veneer, Evelyn had begun to notice subtle terrors forming in her world. It started at her firm's annual gala, a glittering event held in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. Evelyn, resplendent in a deep emerald gown that accentuated her striking features, had been mingling with board members and clients when her husband, Daniel, entered the room. Normally, Daniel's arrival was a calming presence. Tonight, however, Evelyn's keen eyes caught an anomaly. His tie was slightly askew, his hair mussed, and his gaze invasive. "Busy day at the museum?" Evelyn teased lightly, slipping her arm through his. Daniel, a celebrated curator at the Met, nodded with a distracted smile. "Always," he replied, but his grip on his champagne flute was unusually tight. Evelyn's instincts, honed by years of negotiating deals in boardrooms full of predators, whispered that something was off. Her attention was soon drawn to her daughter, Sophie, who had just arrived with a group of friends. Evelyn's heart swelled with pride as she watched Sophie laugh and navigate the room with effortless charm. Yet, even as Evelyn returned to her conversations, she couldn't shake the flicker of unease. It returned later that night, when Sophie lingered at the elevator with Daniel, their voices low and conspiratorial. Evelyn, pretending to look for her wrap, caught Daniel squeezing Sophie's shoulder, a gesture innocent to most, but heavy with unspoken weight to her. The following week brought more peculiarities. Evelyn discovered a credit card charge for a luxury spa in Tribeca, an indulgence she had not booked. When she asked Daniel about it, he chuckled nervously. "Maybe Sophie used my card by mistake," he suggested. Evelyn smiled, filing the inconsistency away. She knew Sophie's spending patterns as well as her own. The spa wasn't her daughter's style, but pressing further would reveal her suspicions, and Evelyn preferred to gather facts before making accusations. Her professional life offered no respite. During a meeting with her CFO, Martin Voss, she noticed a financial discrepancy in one of their newest investments. The figures didn't add up, yet Martin assured her it was just a rounding issue. A rounding issue in a multi-million-dollar venture was a flag she could not ignore. That evening, Evelyn invited Martin and Daniel to a dinner she hosted in their penthouse. She watched them both carefully as she set the table with care, noting how Daniel's jokes about mismanagement at the museum drew laughter from Martin. Their camaraderie felt too familiar, too practiced. After dinner, Evelyn excused herself and walked into her home office. She pulled up Luminary's accounts on her secure server and cross-checked the discrepancies. A pattern emerged. Small withdrawals timed precisely around Daniel's business trips. Returning to the living room, Evelyn paused, just out of view. Martin was speaking in a hushed tone, and Daniel's response sent a chill down her spine. "She won't notice." Evelyn's too focused on the big picture. The words confirmed her worst fears. Something was unfolding behind her back. It wasn't just the numbers or Daniel's distant behavior. It was the web tightening around her. Evelyn's mind raced, cataloging every detail, every interaction, as she resolved to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The storm had begun to brew, and Evelyn Shaw was ready to weather it. Evelyn's morning began with the hum of espresso and the rhythm of her ritualized life. She sat at her minimalist kitchen counter, scrolling through her calendar, her thoughts snagging on the anomalies she had uncovered. Every facet of her life operated like a well-oiled machine, yet now she felt like an engineer facing an unexpected malfunction. Tiny, intermittent, but potentially catastrophic. The first call she made that day was to her private investigator, Jonathan Kessler. A former intelligence officer turned corporate sleuth, Jonathan had a reputation for uncovering secrets buried beneath layers of obfuscation. Evelyn had used his services once before to root out an embezzler in her firm. That had been a straightforward case. This, she feared, was personal. "I need discretion, Jonathan," she said as she gazed out over the park, the city unfurling below her like a glittering map of opportunity and danger. "You always get discretion from me," he replied with a confidence that put her at ease. "What am I looking for?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then let the words flow, each one a bitter acknowledgement of the fractures in her life. "I need everything on my husband, Daniel Shaw. Phone records, financial transactions, surveillance. Start with the past 6 months. And be thorough." Jonathan's voice was steady. "Consider it done. I'll report back within 72 hours. With that, Evelyn put the matter in motion. She needed to maintain her routine, to act as though nothing was amiss. She arrived at Luminary Ventures, her office a sanctuary of glass and steel that reflected her power. Yet as she entered the boardroom for a routine meeting, the murmur of voices fell silent, replaced by an undercurrent of tension that was palpable. Her CFO, Martin Voss, avoided her gaze as he presented updates. Evelyn sat back, her sharp eyes catching inconsistencies not just in the numbers, but in Martin's body language. His usual confidence was absent, replaced by a slight hesitance, a nervous energy that she could almost taste. "Martin," Evelyn interjected during his presentation, her voice calm but edged with steel, "these projections for the Meditech acquisition are conservative compared to the initial assessment. Can you explain the variance?" Martin fumbled with his papers, his smile too tight. "Market volatility," he replied. "It's a precautionary measure." Evelyn nodded slowly, masking her skepticism. She had built Luminary Ventures on a foundation of rigorous analysis and calculated risks. Martin's explanation didn't hold water, but she let it pass for now. She needed more information before she pressed him. Later that afternoon, Evelyn's assistant Claire knocked lightly on her door. "There's a delivery for you," Claire said, setting a sleek, cream-colored envelope on Evelyn's desk. It bore no return address. Evelyn opened it with care, her heart beating faster as she unfolded the contents. Inside was a single photograph, Daniel seated at a table in a dimly lit restaurant, leaning intimately toward a woman she didn't recognize. Evelyn's breath caught, but she maintained her composure. The photo had no timestamp, no context, but it was enough to deepen her resolve. Evelyn stared at the photo for a long moment before slipping it into her drawer. "Thank you, Claire. That'll be all for now." That evening, Evelyn arrived home later than usual. The penthouse was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heater. Daniel was in the living room, a glass of red wine in hand, pretending to read a book. His smile as she entered felt rehearsed. "How was work?" he asked, his tone casual. Evelyn matched his tone, her mask firmly in place. "Busy as always. The Meditech deal is proving interesting." "Sounds stressful," Daniel replied, his eyes flickering away for just a moment. Evelyn noted it, filing the detail alongside a growing catalog of doubts. Their conversation meandered through safe topics, Sophie's upcoming midterms, an art exhibit Daniel wanted to visit. Yet, beneath the surface, Evelyn felt the weight of unspoken words. As they said goodnight, her mind churned with plans and possibilities. Over the next 2 days, Evelyn juggled the demands of her career while piecing together the puzzle of her life. Jonathan's first report arrived via encrypted email. She read it in her home office late at night, the city lights casting long shadows across her desk. The report was damning. Daniel had been visiting a boutique hotel in Tribeca every Wednesday afternoon for the past 3 months, meeting the same woman from the photograph. Her name was Simone Harper, a curator from a rival museum. Evelyn's stomach churned as she read the details. Simone had recently received a prestigious grant, funded in part by anonymous donors, one of whom was Daniel. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was financial. He was siphoning money from their joint account to fund Simone's ambitions. But that wasn't all Jonathan had uncovered. There were transactions tied to Martin Voss. Payments to shell companies that didn't match any of Luminary Ventures' official dealings. Evelyn's sharp mind immediately began to connect the dots. Daniel and Martin, two of the people she trusted most, were linked by a web of financial deceit. The following day, Evelyn acted as though nothing had changed. She went to work, hosted meetings, and even smiled through a client dinner. But inside, she was strategizing. She set up a meeting with Luminary's head of cybersecurity, ordering a quiet audit of Martin's digital activity. She also began reaching out to her most trusted legal advisors, preparing for the fallout she knew was coming. Evelyn didn't confront them. Instead, she took photos and forwarded them to Jonathan. Her mind was already working on the next steps. When she returned home, Sophie was in the living room, engrossed in a book. Evelyn sat beside her daughter, studying her closely. Sophie's demeanor was light, but Evelyn detected an edge of discomfort. "Sophie," Evelyn began, her voice soft but probing, "have you noticed anything unusual about your father lately?" Sophie hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. "No, not really," she said, too quickly. Evelyn didn't press her. She needed Sophie's trust for what was coming next. By Sunday evening, Evelyn had the full picture. Martin and Daniel were collaborating to funnel money from Luminary's accounts into ventures tied to Simone's museum. The financial discrepancies she had noticed were only the tip of the iceberg. They were planning something larger, something that could threaten the company she had built from the ground up. As Evelyn sat in her office, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her, she realized she had two choices: confront them outright or let them think they were winning while she set her trap. Evelyn Shaw wasn't the type to rush into battle unprepared. She would play the long game. Let them think she was blind, complacent, and when the time came, she would dismantle their scheme with precision. The storm brewing inside her had found its direction. Evelyn Shaw sat in her penthouse office, the expansive windows framing the city skyline. She stared at the dossier Jonathan Kessler had sent earlier that morning. It was a thick document, its contents devastating. Each page unraveled a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving her husband Daniel and her CFO, Martin Voss. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed withdrawals from their joint account funneled into offshore entities tied to Martin's shell companies. Surveillance photos captured Daniel meeting with Simone Harper at boutique hotels, and internal company communications revealed Martin's attempts to manipulate projections for the Meditech acquisition. Evelyn felt a mix of anger and cold determination as the threads of their betrayal came into sharp focus. That afternoon, Evelyn summoned Claire, her assistant, to her office. She spoke calmly, her tone betraying none of the emotional storm within. "Claire, I need you to access all communications from Martin Voss's office for the past 6 months, Evelyn said. "Emails, memos, meeting notes, everything. Keep this under the radar." Claire's brows furrowed in concern, but she nodded. "Understood, Ms. Shaw." As Claire left, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Daniel and Martin's scheme wasn't just about siphoning money or indulging in an affair. It was bigger. Their moves aligned with Luminary's most sensitive project, the Meditech acquisition. If her hunch was correct, they were plotting to sabotage the deal, positioning themselves to profit while leaving Luminary in shambles. Later that evening, Evelyn returned to the penthouse to find Daniel in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with exaggerated care. The scene looked domestic, even idyllic, but Evelyn's eyes caught the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided looking directly at her. "You're home early," Daniel said, glancing up briefly. "I had a light day," Evelyn replied, pouring herself a glass of wine. She swirled the liquid, watching its deep red hues. "How is the museum?" Daniel's knife paused mid-slice. "Busy, you know how it is." "Of course," Evelyn said, her tone neutral. She wanted to probe further but knew better than to push. Let him think he was still ahead of her. The following day, Evelyn met with Jonathan in a secluded cafe far from her usual haunts. He handed her a USB drive, his expression grim. "Worse than I thought," he said. "Martin isn't just cooking the books. He's positioning to take over Luminary after the Meditech deal collapses. And Daniel?" Jonathan hesitated. "He's deeper into this than I initially believed. Simone isn't just an affair. She's Martin's contact for laundering the funds." Evelyn's grip on her coffee cup tightened. "And Sophie? Is she involved?" Jonathan shook his head. "No evidence suggests she's part of it, but she may know more than she realizes." Relief mingled with frustration. Sophie's distance over the past months made sense now, but Evelyn wasn't ready to bring her daughter into this maelstrom. Not yet. "Keep digging," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "I need every piece of leverage." That evening, Evelyn tested Daniel's defenses. She waited until after dinner when he was relaxed with a glass of whiskey and joined him in the living room. "I was thinking," she began, sitting opposite him, "we should take a vacation, just the two of us." Daniel looked surprised, but quickly masked it with a smile. "That's a great idea. Where were you thinking?" "Somewhere remote," Evelyn said. "Maybe a villa in Tuscany or a private island." Daniel chuckled, but his eyes betrayed unease. "Sounds incredible. Let's plan for the spring." Evelyn noted the deflection. He didn't want to commit to anything too soon, not while his plans with Martin were in motion. "Spring, then," she agreed, sipping her wine. She allowed the conversation to drift to other topics, watching him closely for cracks in his facade. In the days that followed, Evelyn put the next phase of her plan into motion. She had Jonathan install key logging software on Daniel's personal devices and hacked Martin's encrypted communications. The information they uncovered painted a damning picture. Daniel had been secretly transferring funds into Simone's accounts, some of which were tied to Martin's shell companies. The withdrawals were timed to coincide with Luminary's quarterly filings, ensuring they flew under the radar. Meanwhile, Martin had been feeding false projections to the board, setting the stage for the Meditech deal to implode. The fallout would devalue Luminary's stock, allowing Martin to buy controlling shares through his offshore entities. The most shocking discovery, however, came from Daniel's emails. He wasn't just passively involved, he was actively orchestrating parts of the scheme. One email to Simone read, "Once the acquisition fails, Martin will step in. Evelyn won't know what hit her." Evelyn read the message multiple times, each word a dagger to her resolve. Her husband, the man she had trusted for over a decade, was conspiring to destroy her career and her company. On the surface, Evelyn maintained her composure. She continued attending meetings, entertaining clients, and hosting dinners with the same poise that had earned her the respect of the business world. But beneath the surface, she was planning her counterattack. She began by securing Luminary's most vulnerable assets. She transferred key accounts to a subsidiary under her sole control, ensuring Martin couldn't access them. She also arranged for a private audit of the Meditech deal, gathering evidence to discredit Martin's projections. Evelyn's next move was more personal. She invited Sophie to lunch, choosing a quiet cafe where they could talk openly. "Sophie," Evelyn began, her voice gentle, "I've noticed you've been distant lately. Is everything okay?" Sophie hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with school." Evelyn reached across the table, placing a hand on her daughter's. "You can tell me anything, you know that." Sophie bit her lip, looking conflicted. It's nothing really, just things with Dad. He's been acting weird." Evelyn's heart ached at her daughter's uncertainty. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "Together." The breaking point came during a board meeting where Martin presented his latest projections. Evelyn listened calmly as he outlined his case, noting the nervous glances he exchanged with several board members. When he finished, Evelyn stood, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Martin," she said. "Before we proceed, I'd like to share some findings from our recent audit." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up with a detailed report. It exposed Martin's discrepancies, highlighting his financial ties to the shell companies and his role in sabotaging the Meditech deal. The room fell silent as Evelyn's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "These actions are not only unethical but criminal," she said, her gaze piercing Martin's, "and I have the evidence to prove it." Martin paled, his composure crumbling. This is outrageous." "Save it," Evelyn interrupted. "Security will escort you out. Effective immediately, you're terminated." As Martin was led away, Evelyn felt a surge of satisfaction, but her victory was tempered by the knowledge that her battle with Daniel was far from over. That night, Evelyn confronted Daniel. She laid the evidence before him, her tone icy. "I know everything," she said. "The affair, the embezzlement, the plans to destroy Luminary. How long did you think you could get away with this?" Daniel's face fell, his usual charm evaporating. "Evelyn, I can explain." "Don't," she snapped. "You underestimated me, Daniel. That was your first mistake. Your second was thinking I'd let you win." As Daniel stammered for an explanation, Evelyn felt a strange calm wash over her. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was ready for the final act. Evelyn Shaw didn't waste time. The morning after her confrontation with Daniel, she sat in her office, the hum of the city below muffled by the soundproof glass. Her mind was clear, her strategy razor sharp. This was no longer about heartbreak or betrayal. It was about survival and revenge. Evelyn's first call was to Jonathan Kessler. He had become her confidant through this ordeal, a necessary partner in dismantling the conspiracy that sought to ruin her. Jonathan's laugh was dry. "Already ahead of you, Evelyn. I've tracked payments Simone made to an LLC tied to Martin's name. It looks like they're using her museum's accounts to launder funds." "Perfect," Evelyn replied. "Get me documentation. I'm taking this to the board." After hanging up, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the skyline. Her next move required careful timing. Evelyn had spent years cultivating loyalty among her board members, earning their respect through transparency and success. Now, she would use that trust to root out the rot Martin and Daniel had planted. Later that day, Evelyn invited Sophie to join her for dinner. They dined at an elegant yet unpretentious bistro, a deliberate choice to put Sophie at ease. Evelyn watched her daughter pick at her food, her usual confidence replaced by hesitation. "Sophie," Evelyn began gently, "you've seemed distant lately. I know things at home have been strained. I want to make sure you're okay." Sophie looked up, her expression guarded. "I'm fine, Mom, just school stuff." Evelyn leaned forward, her tone softening. "You're my daughter, Sophie. I love you more than anything. If there's something you know, something you've seen, it's okay to tell me." The plea hung in the air. Sophie fidgeted, then spoke, her words halting at first. "Dad's been different. I don't know what's going on, but he's always on his phone, always sneaking off. I caught him whispering to someone the other day. When I asked, he said it was about work." Evelyn nodded, encouraging her to continue. "And what do you think?" Sophie hesitated, then sighed. "I think he's hiding something. I don't know what, but it feels wrong." Reaching across the table, Evelyn squeezed Sophie's hand. "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle it." Sophie's eyes filled with relief, but Evelyn felt a pang of guilt. Her daughter deserved a family built on honesty, not deception. But for now, Evelyn would use what she knew to protect her. At Luminary Ventures, Evelyn moved swiftly. She scheduled an emergency board meeting, citing critical updates on the Meditech acquisition. She spent the next 48 hours preparing, working late into the night with her legal and cybersecurity teams. The evidence Jonathan provided was damning. False financial statements, fraudulent transactions, and a clear paper trail linking Martin to Daniel. The day of the meeting arrived, and Evelyn entered the boardroom with a commanding presence. Martin was already there, his expression smug. He had no idea what was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn began, addressing the board members seated around the polished oak table. "I've called this meeting to address a serious issue within our organization." She gestured to Claire, who dimmed the lights and activated the projector. Slides appeared, detailing financial discrepancies and Martin's offshore accounts. "For months," Evelyn continued, her voice steady, "certain individuals within Luminary Ventures have been manipulating our financial reports to serve their own interests. These actions have jeopardized our Meditech acquisition and, by extension, the future of this company." The room buzzed with murmurs as Evelyn advanced to the next slide, a bank statement showing Martin's name tied to a fraudulent account. "Martin Voss?" she said, her gaze piercing. "You have violated this company's trust and your fiduciary duties. Effective immediately, you are terminated." Martin's face turned ashen. "This is preposterous. You have no proof." "I have ample proof," Evelyn cut in, her voice like a whip. "And as of this morning, our legal team has filed a lawsuit against you for fraud and breach of contract." Security entered the room to escort Martin out. He sputtered protests, but Evelyn didn't waver. Once he was gone, she turned back to the board. "Let this be a reminder," she said, her tone resolute. "At Luminary Ventures, we hold integrity above all else." The board members nodded, their respect for Evelyn evident. She had not only protected the company, but demonstrated unyielding strength. Evelyn returned to the penthouse that evening to find Daniel waiting for her. His expression was a mix of defiance and desperation. "You've gone too far," he said, his voice trembling. "I heard about Martin." Evelyn set her bag down carefully, her movements deliberate. "I'm cleaning house, Daniel. If you think you're exempt, think again." Daniel's bravado faltered. "Evelyn, we can fix this. It doesn't have to end like this." She stepped closer, her gaze unrelenting. "You destroyed our marriage, you betrayed me, and you tried to ruin the company I built. There's no fixing this." Daniel reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "I've already filed for divorce," she said, "and Jonathan has enough evidence to ensure you face legal consequences." Daniel's face crumpled. I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to hurt you." Evelyn's laugh was cold. "Every step you took was calculated. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." The following week, Evelyn held a press conference to announce a restructuring at Luminary Ventures. She emphasized the company's commitment to ethical practices and its plans to move forward stronger than ever. The media praised her leadership, painting her as a paragon of resilience. Behind the scenes, Evelyn worked with her legal team to finalize the divorce and secure her assets. She also reached out to Sophie, explaining the situation in terms her daughter could understand. "I'm sorry, Mom," Sophie said tearfully. "I should have said something sooner." Evelyn embraced her tightly. "This isn't your fault, Sophie. It's your father's. And we'll get through this together." In the months that followed, Evelyn rebuilt her life. She focused on Luminary Ventures, leading the company to unprecedented success. She also reconnected with Sophie, their bond stronger than ever. As for Daniel, his name became a cautionary tale in business circles, a reminder of what happens to those who betray trust. One evening, as Evelyn stood on the penthouse balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below, she felt a sense of peace. She had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The storm had passed, and Evelyn Shaw was ready to write her next chapter. Evelyn Shaw sat alone in her penthouse, the hume of the city below muffled by the heavy silence of her thoughts. It had been weeks since she had dismantled the conspiracy that threatened to destroy her, yet the aftermath lingered like the quiet after a storm. Her legal team had finalized the divorce papers that morning, severing her ties to Daniel once and for all. The document lay before her, a symbol of closure and a gateway to freedom. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint sound of distant car horns. Evelyn allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability, staring at the skyline with a bittersweet mix of satisfaction and sorrow. She had reclaimed her company, her reputation, and her control, but the cost was steep. Her family, the illusion of security, and the remnants of a love she now realized had been hollow for years. Daniel's descent had been swift and unforgiving. Evelyn's legal team had been relentless in building a case against him, using Jonathan Kessler's evidence as the foundation. The financial records revealed his role in embezzlement, his affair with Simone Harper, and his collusion with Martin Voss to sabotage Luminary Ventures. The lawsuit, filed by Luminary's board, painted him as a calculating saboteur. Simone, desperate to avoid the fallout, turned on Daniel without hesitation. Her testimony, coupled with a mountain of evidence, ensured Daniel's professional and social downfall. The museum that once hailed him as a visionary curator swiftly distanced itself from the scandal. His name was blacklisted in Manhattan's elite circles, a once beloved figure now shrouded in disgrace. Martin's legal troubles deepened as Evelyn's team uncovered even more of his malfeasance. His offshore accounts, hidden transactions, and attempts to manipulate Luminary's Meditech acquisition formed an airtight case. The SEC launched an investigation, freezing his assets and effectively dismantling his career. Evelyn received a quiet satisfaction watching Martin's life unravel, a fitting end for a man who had underestimated her resolve. Despite everything, Evelyn's priority remained her daughter, Sophie. The revelations about her father had shaken Sophie to her core, leaving her questioning the life she thought she knew. Evelyn made it a point to spend more time with her, attending her college events, sharing quiet evenings, and allowing space for Sophie to process the betrayal. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner at home, Sophie broke the silence. "I didn't want to believe it," she said, her voice trembling. "I kept telling myself, Dad couldn't. Evelyn reached across the table, taking Sophie's hand. "I know, sweetheart. It's hard to accept that someone we love can betray us, but you're stronger than you realize, and we'll get through this together." Sophie nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry for doubting you, Mom. There's nothing to apologize for," Evelyn said softly. "We're a team now, you and me." Rebuilding Luminary Ventures. Evelyn poured herself into her work, determined to ensure Luminary Ventures emerged stronger than ever. She initiated sweeping reforms, implementing stricter oversight and transparent processes to rebuild trust with her board and stakeholders. The Meditech acquisition, once teetering on the brink of collapse, became a cornerstone of Luminary's success under her leadership. She also made a point to foster a new culture within the company, one that prioritized collaboration and integrity. Employees who had grown disillusioned under Martin's tenure found renewed faith in Evelyn's vision. Luminary's stock soared, and the media hailed her as a symbol of resilience and ethical leadership. One evening, Evelyn attended a gala hosted by Luminary Ventures to celebrate their latest milestone, the successful launch of a groundbreaking healthcare initiative. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, her emerald gown a stark contrast to the muted tones around her. Colleagues and clients approached her with congratulations, but she deflected their praise with a humble smile. As the night wound down, Evelyn found herself on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. The familiar ache of loss still lingered, but it was tempered by a growing sense of fulfillment. She had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, not just as a leader, but as a person. Jonathan joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Quite the turnout," he remarked, handing her a glass. Evelyn chuckled softly. "It's nice to see Luminary thriving again." Jonathan raised his glass. "To your victory." Evelyn clinked her glass against his, but hesitated before taking a sip. "It doesn't feel like a victory, Jonathan, not entirely." "You survived," he replied. "You protected your company, your daughter, and your reputation. That's more than most can say." Evelyn nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Maybe you're right. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began to explore new avenues beyond Luminary Ventures. She partnered with philanthropic organizations to support young entrepreneurs and invested in programs that promoted ethical leadership. Her personal life, once defined by a fragile marriage and relentless ambition, now felt fuller, more balanced. She also began writing a memoir, not just about her rise in the corporate world, but about resilience, betrayal, and the lessons she had learned. The act of putting her story into words became a form of catharsis, a way to make sense of the chaos that had upended her life. As Evelyn reflected on the past year, she felt a profound sense of closure. Daniel was a distant memory, his attempts to reach out ignored. Sophie was thriving at Columbia, their bond stronger than ever. Luminary Ventures was not just recovering, but soaring, a testament to Evelyn's unwavering determination. One night, as she stood on her balcony, the city stretching before her, she allowed herself a rare indulgence, a sense of pride. She had weathered the storm, outsmarted her enemies, and reclaimed her life. The scars of betrayal would always remain, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they had become part of her armor, a reminder of her strength and resilience. The world could betray Evelyn Shaw once, but it would never catch her unprepared again.